Hey, I'm Mark Personsky. I'm your host for this program, Mideast Realities. We're in Lower Manhattan, outside of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, where Dr. Musa Abu Marzook has been for the last year. We're with his attorney, one of his attorneys, Ashraf Nubani, who has been working on this case, which is the case of the political leader of Hamas being arrested here in the United States, and the Israelis have asked that he be extradited to Israel. And Ashraf, tell us about the case. Tell us a bit about the case and about how your client is doing.
Well, briefly, I mean, in terms of the case, it's been going on for almost a year now. It started when he was arrested at Kennedy Airport because he was on some watch list of the United States government, and subsequently the Israeli authorities, it was actually the Israeli cabinet, asked that he be extradited to Israel, and we're doing our job in fighting the legal battle. But obviously, you know, it's a political case as well, and it may very well be settled politically rather than legally.
Well, it is a political case, and there isn't really a lot that's being done politically, is there? The Islamic community in this country doesn't seem to have much potency.
Well, in the Islamic, it goes beyond the Islamic community, of course, but there has been, you know, some support. People who have been aware of the case have donated money to the legal fund, have helped the family, have sent Dr. Abu Marzook cards. But in terms of mobilizing politically, they really haven't had the opportunity, because no one has taken a leadership role in terms of deciding what should be done on the American level. In terms of what's going on in the Middle East, obviously many things are going on behind the scenes. We don't have access to all that information, but Israel never really wanted Dr. Abu Marzook in Israel. They were content to have him in prison where he's been neutralized,
out of circulation,
and they're quite happy with that situation. They'd like to see this drag on for a longer period of time, because they don't have to give up anything in the meantime, because all they're doing is the beginning process of asking for his extradition. They haven't yet tried him, you know, and because bringing him to Israel would be a problem. Having him tried would be a problem. If he was found guilty, it may be a problem, and I don't think that the Israelis want that headache. And the United States is happy to accommodate by keeping him here, letting him go through the whole legal process.
But what this is it's a part of the process of crushing the Islamic nationalist opposition and propping up the Palestinian secular Palestinian Authority. I mean, that's what this is all about, isn't it?
I think that's part of it, definitely.
And it looks to me like it's relatively successful. Hamas has been substantially weakened, it looks like, whereas the Arafat people have been substantially propped up.
Right, but who is propping up Arafat and who's propping up Hamas? In other words, the people what counts is the people on the ground in Palestine who they support, and obviously Hamas throughout this whole ordeal, Dr. Abu Marzook's ordeal and before, starting with the so-called peace process, Hamas, you know, is now gaining much more support. It's always been a movement amongst the people. So I think that yes, on one level, the American government and Israel have chosen to back Arafat, and in the view of the world, that's who's being backed. But on the ground, it's a totally different reality. I think when you attack people like Siraj, and
you're talking about the head of the Human Rights Commission,
head of the Human Rights
arrested
Commission,
and tortured to everyone's amazement.
Everyone has come to his support on the ground in Palestine, including Hamas and including, you know, the secularist opposition that opposes the authority, or people within the authority who have dared to speak out.
Well,
in a
fair
sense.
enough. They may have come to his defense, but on the other hand, everybody's scared and intimidated also.
Obviously, because he's running a police state, and you know.
Well, it's not a state, a police regime.
A police regime.
If we call it a state, unfortunately, it gives the impression that he's actually achieved. He's far more that Arafat's achieved something that he hasn't.
Even if it isn't a state, but I mean, he's running a police regime there, and that's why people haven't been able to. They've spoken out. I think there have been enough segments of the Palestinian population who have spoken out. Yeah, whether their voice is heard is one thing, but they have spoken out. So I think, in other words, just, you know, to conclude on that point, that what's important is what's going on the ground. And I think on the ground, people are dissatisfied with the status quo. They're dissatisfied with the so-called peace process, and that's what's going to make the difference in the end, I think.
Do you think what is called the peace process is likely to collapse in the future, and that people like Dr. Abu Marzook are going to have to be negotiated with by the Israelis?
I think that in my mind there's no doubt of that. I think that's what's eventually going to happen, because I think that when we were speaking to him earlier, he made the point about Germany, for example, and he suggested Vietnam and other situations. If you want to solve a political problem merely by force, merely by passing resolutions, merely by getting the power brokers to implement a solution, it's only going to be a temporary solution. And if you don't solve the problem on the ground, what you have termed as reservations, if you don't solve the problem of the Palestinian people who are still really living under oppression, there's never going to be a just solution. And I think that Hamas, for the foreseeable future, is going to be instrumental in solving the problem in that area. So they're just going to have to recognize it. They can, everyone is going to have to recognize that.
Is what you're suggesting kind of like that in the 70s, the PLO came along, it was ostracized, it was criticized, it was declared terrorist, all kinds of efforts were made to push it under, and eventually the Israelis decided, for reasons that are complicated, they were going to deal with the PLO. Are you suggesting that in the 90s, Hamas is ostracized, Hamas is declared terrorist, Hamas people are arrested, but that the time is going to come when these are the people who are going to have to be negotiated with?
Right, I think so. I mean, I think from my vantage point, from what I see, I think that there's no other possibility in the near future other than the Hamas card, because for one reason, it's not just because it's an Islamic movement. That's obviously the big part of it. It's an Islamic agenda and so forth. But on the ground, Hamas has been consistently speaking in a forthright manner about the position that they've always taken, which is against the status quo, because the status quo doesn't provide the full rights of Palestinians. They've always been speaking towards the full rights of Palestinians, and they continue to do so. And as long as they do so, they're going to incorporate more and more, as opposed to losing less and less ground.
But the Israelis what are they going to talk to Hamas about? Hamas wants the refugees to return. It wants the people to be able to return to their homes and their villages. It doesn't accept as a just solution the two-state solution. It says we want the Israelis to withdraw for now, and then we want the Palestinians to decide in the future. Right. So what are the Israelis going to talk about with Hamas? A secular state, a unitary?
Obviously now they don't even. It's not even in the agenda to talk to Hamas. Why? Because you still have Arafat. And as long as he's there, or the PA is there after he's gone, as long as that mechanism is there, I think that Israel will milk it for all it's worth. But beyond that,
and by the time they finish milking it, they may control all of the land, as they do west of the Jordan River. The Palestinians may well be on reservations, and there won't be any need to discuss futures, because the Israeli intention is to keep control of the area.
Right, and I'm not going to say that if that situation continues to deteriorate, that there's going to be another intifada. But what I am saying is that what did cause an intifada, the situation on the ground, will cause a new set of circumstances if the situation continues to deteriorate, meaning that whether it's an armed struggle or whether it's countries even outside outside of Palestine, meaning something may happen in Egypt, something may happen in Jordan, which would change the situation.
Things are going to change, maybe in a big way.
I think that
you're just waiting for your moment.
I think if you ask political analysts these days, they will say that the future is going to be a future where the peoples of the Middle East, the Arab people of the Middle East, are going to have a bigger say in government. I think that the governments that are in power now are not going to be in power for long. And I'm not going to. I can't say 5 years. I can't say 10 years.
People used to say that in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. These regimes have stayed around for quite a long time.
But I think it's a different scenario. The only reason I'm optimistic is not just because I am optimistic, even though I may be an optimistic person. I think that the situation on the ground in the Middle East leads to that. I think that the status quo in Egypt can stay for so long, and the status quo in Jordan can stay for so long, and then things have to change, and it's about that time. I mean, King Hussein has been there since 1952.
But my point, that's exactly my point. That regime has stayed, the Saudi regime has stayed, the Egyptian regime with all kinds of turmoil has stayed. Only in Sudan and Iran has there in fact been...
Because the West, America at its head, and obviously with its client state Israel in the region with its own interests, but the interests meet. They've divided the area. They've done so well, and we're living in that in their success. But I'm just saying that it's not going to continue, and I can't determine the time, but it's going to change.
This is Mark Brzezinski. I'm your host. You're watching Mideast Realities. We've just interviewed the political head of the Palestinian Hamas organization. We're outside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Ashraf Nubani is one of the two attorneys working with Dr. Abu Marzook. And Ashraf, tell us a bit about your own background. Where is your own family history and your own allegiances? And
I'm originally from Palestine. I wasn't born there, and I've only seen it once in my life as an American citizen traveling to the area. I was born in Kuwait. My father left the West Bank in order to go to Kuwait because the situation in the West Bank was very difficult. And then in 1970, my parents moved to the United States, and I've been here since I was 4 years old. And went to school here and
went to law school. Now you're a practicing attorney.
Now an attorney.
But you identify strongly as a Palestinian.
Of course. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The United States is a wonderful place in many aspects, and I feel that I am an American because the pluralistic society that we live in, if you're born here or if you come here and you're naturalized, you're a citizen like everyone else. And I appreciate that, and I feel... And in fact, this is my only home in the sense that I don't know any other home. But as a Palestinian, the reason I am here is because I can't go back to my own country. And I wouldn't be in the United States if I had a country to go back to.
You would go back?
I think
even with all the hardship and all the economic disadvantages and all the privileges you have as an American?
I think that I can serve a dual role.
Second home.
As the world is a small place. If it would be a choice between Palestine and any other country on the face of the earth, I would choose Palestine. But in terms of how I can benefit my people, here and abroad, I can function in both. But of course I would like to go back to Palestine, and I want that right to go back. I think that any peace negotiations or any peace treaty that doesn't speak on that point about my right, Ashraf Nubani, as a Palestinian, to go back, I will not accept, I will not support, and I will work for the opposite,
okay,
and that is my right to return.
Is that the answer to the question why you support politically Hamas rather than Arafat?
Definitely that is part of it. Hamas has continuously, persistently spoken on the issues that attract me as a Palestinian. They speak for Jerusalem being the capital of Palestine. This only happened over 40 years that the Palestinian people lost the right to their land. It's not somewhere back in even the 19th century. This is in our lifetime, in the generation of my father, that this land was lost, and I'm going to continue from now until the day that I die to make sure that I have a right to go back to that land.
Hamas also speaks to something different than that. You're an American in a secular, pluralistic society, and you just said how much you appreciate the privileges and kind of society we have here. But Hamas wants to set up an Islamic society.
Right. And I support that as well. But I think that an Islamic society and an Islamic state is misunderstood by many. Whereas here in the West, there's a concept of the division between religion and state. You have to understand that in the Middle East and in Islamic countries, there is no division. No one feels like they're running a quote-unquote religious theocracy. That's not how people think. They think that they're running their own lives. They choose to run it as Muslims, just like we choose here to run it in a pluralistic, secular way, where religion has its position, has its status, but it's not part of the government. So for them, it's not an issue. And
no standing any time.
Government.
Oh, government gets to violate the law. I don't know where we go now.
We should.
I'm Mark Brzezinski. I'm your host for this program. Welcome back to Mideast Realities. We have been discussing the case of Musa Abu Marzook, the political head of the Palestinian Hamas organization, who is incarcerated in Lower Manhattan at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, and whom the Israelis are trying to get extradited to Israel. And this series of programs has been discussing the case, the issues, and we've interviewed Dr. Abu Marzook in the prison. And we're sitting now outside the prison in Lower Manhattan with Ashraf Nubani, one of the two main attorneys who is working on this case. And Ashraf is discussing his own Palestinian background, his own aspirations for Palestine, his own visions of the future, and why he identifies, if I'm not putting any words in your mouth, with the Hamas political organization.
Right. Of course, I identify it, first of all, because it speaks for the justice and the rights of the Palestinian people, which, as a Palestinian, I feel that they're addressing my needs and my rights. Of course, their Islamic agenda is taken out of context in the sense that this is part of the Palestinian people and part of the region, that it's natural that Islam plays an important role, yet there's no division between religion and state, and therefore people feel that all they're doing is practicing their lives. Whether someone from the outside terms it as religious or as Islamic as opposed to secular, that's their problem,
but
not
we're not
ours.
Talking about just religion. We're talking about the main issue for many women is that women are put in a certain role, a certain dress code is enforced, a certain relationship to men in society is enforced.
Right, but actually it's not enforced in the sense that it comes from a dictate up from some government official. It's a woman chooses to practice the religion and therefore chooses to wear what is called the hijab, the Islamic dress. And if you look, for example, if you look at the situation in Jordan as compared to, for example, let's say Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they're required to wear Islamic dress. Sometimes what happens is when females, not all of course, but some females, when they leave the country on a plane, they may decide to take off their Islamic headdress and they go out to wherever they're going, as like any other person in the West. In Jordan, where people are not forced, they're not forced to wear it by the government, you find that the overwhelming majority of people in Jordan, of the women, choose to wear the Islamic dress.
But that's not the issue. The issue is, what about those who choose not to wear the Islamic dress?
Those who choose to wearing the Islamic dress represents modesty for the woman. In other words, that Islam does not say, the laws of Islam, as dictated, we believe, by God, do not tell us to go spy on people and seeing whether they're drinking in their houses or whether they're good Muslims in their own homes and so forth. But at least in society, there has to be a semblance of peace. There has to be a semblance of purity, of modesty, and so forth. And the Islamic dress is a part of that.
What about those who are Christian and don't? What about those who are Muslim and who don't want to observe your code of modesty?
I think those groups who traditionally have not been Muslim, meaning Christians in the areas and so forth, since they've lived with Muslims for centuries, have some of the same moral and traditional sense of modesty as do the Muslims. In other words, that I don't think that a Christian who's been living in Palestine would mind wearing the dress.
Modesty is definition. Just like terrorism is definition.
Right, in Palestine, in Muslim countries, it's defined in a certain way.
And
I
Islamic
think that
societies are known for enforcing social and cultural rules on everyone, whether they agree with them or not, which is the exact opposite of what's done in this country that you are citizens of.
But
Right now we'll see women in shorts, we'll see women in hijab, we'll see women in skirts, we'll see men in suits, we might see a man jogging by. But in your country, in the country you want, in the country Hamas wants, they want to enforce a theocratical and dogmatic.
What we would term theocratical, yes, but like I said, to the people there, if they choose this form of government, and Hamas has made it clear that they want free elections, in the sense that, in other words, if the people decide that they don't want Islam as an implementation of law, they don't want it as a tradition, I think that Hamas would be wrong to step in their way. In other words, if they don't want it, that's fine. We call people to what we think is right, like everyone else calls people to what they feel is right. But and those who end up in terms of leading the people in the end, it will go back to what the people decide. As to the issue, as to the issue that you addressed in terms of the Islamic dress for women and so forth, the point is that, again, because we don't differentiate between the secular and the profane, the religion and state, what happens is that that Muslims living in a community decide to give up some individual rights for the benefit of the community. We can make that decision if the majority decides that that's what they want to do. In other words, there will be a minority, some of them may be Muslims, who decide not to practice the codes of Islam. Some of them may be Christians or secularists, and they say that we don't want to wear the hijab, but they're going to have to give up individual rights for the benefit of the community.
What about all the
We
Jews
may not agree with that here.
Who now live in the area of what you call Palestine? What about all of them? Are they going to also live in an Islamic state, just like some of the more radical Jews insist everybody must live in a Jewish state?
That's why I think that some people have been throwing up, I don't know who they are, but I've heard it, the idea of one state and two peoples. In other words, that if there's a state under the rule of the Palestinian majority choosing to rule themselves, and Jews decide to live in that state, they're welcome to do so. Those who can't accept Palestinians ruling themselves and ruling the Jews who live there will decide to pick up and go back to New York or to Poland, or wherever
I think they'll choose to live in an Israeli Jewish state.
But that's what right now the Jews as a group, they have the benefit of living in they have dual citizenship. They, for example, here in the United States,
most of them do not.
But
Most
they've been
Israelis
brought
are
in.
only Israelis.
Hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews have been brought into.
Some are.
Hundreds of thousands
in a country.
In a country. Okay, 20%. That's like saying.
But let's talk about
out
the 80%.
of America, when we're a population of 280 million, whatever it is. When you say 20%.
I'm not going to let you off the hook on this one.
When you say
I'll grant you the 20%. Let's deal with the 80%.
All right. The 80%. I think even the 80%. I think that the Jews who live in Palestine, the Israelis who live in Palestine, feel that they are still foreign to this country. They will
isn't
say.
It up to them to decide what they feel? When you ask them,
those people
they say they want to live in a Jewish Israeli state.
I think those that lived lived in Palestine before 1948, they have